I wanted to start off with the title track of Sumatra because it's also the opening track of the album, and it has this kind of arresting experience to put this album on and start with that.
Mhm.
Especially if you've listened to your past work, because suddenly, you have the even song choir, uh, um,
Mhm. Mhm.
floating through, and it's obviously has a very kind of somber heaviness to it, but then your playing that follows is this interesting light, and it's this really interesting, I don't know, push and pull contrast. What made you decide to start not just the song that way, but the album that way?
Yeah, a really good question. I think I should back up on how I created the concept in the first place,
Okay.
because it began with me taking walks over a series of years, really. And one of the things, I don't do it all the time, but often enough, I'll take a cell phone with me and just dictate, um, as I walk by something. Something inspires me. I get a thought or whatever. And as I was conceptualizing the album, I went back to these little recording snippets that really canvassed, a few years, and
Mm,
said to myself, is there something there? And I decided, yes, there is something there. And it really reflects this tension between beauty, and um, scarcity. Maybe you would call it, endangered life, endangered species. There was just this push pull that I thought, um, over time, could be a metaphor for what I wanted to say in
mhm,
an album. And so Sumatra, the song, really sets the stage for everything that follows on this album. And it sets a tone too, because, you know if you ask the question, Chris, why Sumatra, right?
mhm,
On it, to me, Sumatra is two things. Sumatra is a country, and though I've never visited, I've always wanted to. It's supposed to be one of the most beautiful countries on the planet, and
mm,
also one of the most biodiverse. The kinds of plants and animals and whatnot you find there, some you can't find anyplace else in the world. And yet so much of it is endangered, and much of that endangerment is man-made, right?
mm,
So
mhm,
that's the country. Sumatra is also a coffee.
right,
It's my favorite coffee. And what makes it so is it's bold,
mhm,
it it's complex, but it has low acidity. And that was my aspiration for this album. I wanted it to be bold. I wanted it to be thought provoking, but I also wanted it to be in this era of people not as much as we once did listening to albums from end
mhm.
to end. For those people who took the time to do it, that this album would be one that takes them on a journey.
Mhm. But going back to the initial question, so why start the journey with, the that choir, that heaviness coming in?
Yeah. So I I saw the song in three parts,
Mhm.
and fairly quickly I came to believe it needed to start with Gregorian. chant. And why is that? Because at least in my life experience, there's no more ancient prayer than Gregorian chant. I was born Catholic,
Hmm.
and so even as a little kid, that music was part of my life experience. And I thought, you know, for what I'm trying to achieve with this album, starting with prayer, starting with ancient prayer, prayer that's older than the United States of America,
Hmm.
was very important to me. And the other thing, I guess, about Gregorian chant, I'm here in Seattle,
Hmm.
and St. Mark's Cathedral, which is where we recorded the Gregorian chant, is host to a Sunday service. It's been doing it for a generation, called
Hmm.
Compline, and people of all faiths, no faith at all, come to this service because the music transports them. It takes them to places. It heals them. And so I knew that about this choir
Hmm.
also, and that service. And so I wanted to bottle some of that for this album.
Hmm.
And so I was lucky because through a sequence of connections, I got to them, and they agreed to do it. And
Hmm.
so here we are.
Okay. Okay. No, that's very cool. And then, I mean, was it tricky to figure out how to integrate that? Because again, your sound is very different from that sound. And I mean, I think it comes off well. It's almost like you can picture, someone in a radio station who's doing a crossfade between two songs and that kind of thing. Is that, it's like, but it seems like it would be like, okay, how do I get from point A to point B when they're so disparate?
Oh yeah. So the thing of it is, and this is really cool. So I wrote the mid section first.
Okay.
So the second part you hear, I wrote first. So I had to find a Gregorian chant that fit that. That was a journey,
Mm,
because there are tons of Gregorian chants,
yeah.
and not only sonically, but what are they saying in the
Yeah.
Gregorian chant? And so I went to school. I became an internet junkie, a YouTube
Mm,
junkie, and just went through hundreds of Gregorian chants, found this one. And honestly, Chris, as soon as I heard it, I knew that was the one.
mm,
And it was cemented when I understood what was being sung, because essentially it's Mother Mary sort of hovering over the world and trying to heal it.
okay.
And so I said, "Oh, that's perfect. I that's
Mhm,
this is it." And so as a mock-up, I had a YouTube recording of the Gregorian chant, followed by just me on guitar doing that B section. And then for the C section, I really didn't have the musical skill to create what was in my head. So
mm,
I sat down with our drummer, Jake Evans, who has a degree in jazz drumming. And
mm,
and I said, Jake, this is what I'm hearing. Can you help me?
mhm,
And he said, yeah, in fact, what I can do is create a loop for you, and you layer on top of that. I said, okay, yeah, I can do that. And that was the beginnings of what you hear at the end of the song. And really, it was not until we were in studio
Mhm.
that our producer, Tucker Martine, said, how cool it would be if the choir comes back in at the very end of the
Mhm.
song. And I said, oh my God, yes. And people who hear it tell me they, some of them get chills with that, because you're sort of in this, rhythm of East meets West.
Mhm.
And then, that ancient sound comes
Yeah.
back at the very end of the song.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And, you know, the other thing that struck me about this album is the songs are so eclectic. Each one has a different style, almost a different genre. Um, really just it's like, oh wow. And I'm wondering, how much of that was intentional and how much of it was just happenstance and this is what flows from your mind.
Mm, yeah. I don't know how people receive this album. They have to tell me, right?
Right.
But I see myself primarily as a songwriter, a storyteller. This is an album of stories
Mhm.
at the end of the day. And so my my primary concern was that the music fit the story,
Mhm. Mhm.
you know, and of course our sound can sway, it can lean into one genre versus another depending on the song in any event. And that has been the case for Paula Boggs Band our entire time of being a band. Some of our songs are more folky,
Mhm.
others are more bluegrassy, more jazz, more, Americana mix of all of those things, more soul, more gospel, you know, American roots. Our music is at its core American roots music, right? And
Mhm.
so that's how I think of this album. It is an American roots album. It's a celebration of American roots, and it is a storyteller's album.
Yeah, and yet, there are songs like, "Note to Quinn," which is almost more of a spoken word poetry, have a vibe to it. What about that song spoke to you that, "Alright, this is the way we need to deliver this one?"
Yeah. So, it starts with the story, and the story of a friend who died long ago of AIDS, and a catalog of things he missed,
Hmm.
in the
Yeah.
world, uh, by dying young. So that, at the end of the day, that's the song, that's the story, that is the
Mhm.
story I wanted to tell. And it's a complex story in the sense that there are so many um, good things um, he missed by dying young, but he also missed some very bad things too,
Yeah.
like 9/11. And so there's this catalog of stuff. He was gay, I'm gay, and the the song speaks to some of the gains of gay people
Mhm.
over the past generation. It talks about gay marriage and stuff like that. So that was the song, and I went on this journey, Chris, of I wanted to be uncomfortable as a songwriter. I wanted to, you know, stretch myself. So I went on this journey of listening to beats. I just, went through this journey, and I said, "Oh wow, we've never done anything like this before. We've never done
Mhm.
anything like this." So I went through that. Um, then I said, "But it's got to fit with this album." And the best way I thought of to do that was to ground it in banjo. So you hear banjo
Mhm.
throughout this. All of there is an electric guitar. However, every other instrument you hear is 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 processed, but it's an acoustic instrument. The,
Mhm.
the the fiddle is an acoustic instrument. The harmonica is an
Yeah.
acoustic instrument. All of these, the bass sound is a stand up bass. All of
Okay.
these instruments are acoustic, fed through this
Right.
effects system. And and at first I was singing it. It was actually a band member, Darren Lucas, who is a multi instrumentalist, and I can't even remember how many instruments on this particular song he plays in studio. He said, Paula, have you thought about doing this as spoken word? And I was like,
Hmm.
no, I had not thought of doing this as spoken word. I've never done a spoken word song, but
Mhm.
let's give it a shot. And it just worked, Chris. And
Hmm.
our producer, Tucker Martine, it was his idea to have another singer sing behind me in parts. And that was Arietta Ward of
Okay.
Portland, Oregon, who is an amazing soul singer, R&B singer slash jazz. And I guess the final piece of it was I said to Tucker, you know, there's some I know we're going to do the spoken word thing, but there's some places where I just feel compelled to sing. And Tucker basically gave me permission,
Mhm.
to he said, sing wherever you want to sing,
Mhm. Mhm.
and just groove it,
Yeah.
and do it how it feels right to you. Don't even think about it. Just do it. So I took that, and that's what you get in
Okay.
in that song.
And I mean, I'm always curious in those instances, do you think that for I don't know if this is an appropriate term, lack of preparation made for a more honest, more raw feeling performance, because it wasn't something
Yeah,
you'd gone over and over and over again. And it was, as you said, you're trying to stretch, you're throwing yourself into areas you've never been in, and as a result, it's like, there's nothing fake about it.
that was really important to me for the entire album. It
Mhm.
was really important for it to strike the listener as authentic. And there's some songs on the album that are just really stripped to their essence. This is the most orchestrated on. Well, I mean,
Mhm.
maybe it's a toss up between Sumatra and Note to Quinn,
Yeah.
which is most orchestrated. But yes, I think that spontaneity, that I just need to be myself as I record this. It comes through
Mhm.
in the performance. And I have shared this song with spoken word poets.
Hmm.
People I respect, people who have been Grammy nominated for spoken word. And
Mhm.
I've reached out to them and I said, I'm a rookie. What do you think about this?
Mhm.
And I've shared it with a couple of them, and they've said, Paula, this is dope. This is
Mhm.
really dope. And part of what makes it dope, and they both said it, and these people, are different people, um, said that banjo. I've
Hmm.
never heard a spoken word piece use banjo. And they were
Mm.
like, and the groove is dope. They were like,
Yeah.
the groove and your cadence is dope. So they, so I, with that sort of, stamp of approval. And I really was trying to, I guess the other piece of what inspired me to write it this way was I've always been a fan of Gil Scott Heron and his music and the way he conveyed information, political sentiment,
Mhm.
just the story has always been, something that, inspired me. It has inspired a generation of rappers, of course, but
Mhm.
even beyond that genre, um, his storytelling is just so powerful in that format. And so, in a way,
Yeah.
it's an homage to Gil Scott Heron too.
Okay. Okay. And yeah, you yourself have some interesting turns of phrase on this album. One that stood out to me, the song Route 66.
Mm.
Um, particularly the line "forward only works as an action verb," which I thought was a cool turn of phrase, and I'm wondering if you remember how that came about.
Yeah, I think I Googled it.
Oh, okay.
I Googled forward. I was like, well, what does the dictionary say
Mhm.
about the word forward? Because I wanted that to be a propelling word in
Mhm.
that song. And I went to Webster, and it was like it's an action verb. I was like, oh, that is brilliant. I can use that. I can run
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah, it's a great example of just a few words that says a lot.
Mhm.
And then it was interesting also that song. And have you ever heard? There's a song. It wasn't released as a single, but there's a song by Darius Rucker called "While
Mm.
I've Still Got the Time."
I don't know that song, but I love him.
Yeah, it's on his first country album,
Mm.
and it wasn't released as a single, but I love it. And it reminded me, your song reminded me of his, because his starts, it's like the 40th birthday, and it starts off, 39 candles burnt down on a cake, and yours starts with 66
Hmm.
candles on the cake. And it's that kind of, I mean, they're very different songs, but it's that kind of same, all right, here's a moment where we're kind of putting a demarcation to look back and look
Hmm.
forward at the same time.
Hmm.
Um, and so I was like, oh, this reminds me of this one. This is like, if I was running it on radio, these would be cool to put back to back kind of thing.
Mm.
But
I take
anyway,
that as a huge compliment.
yeah,
I love
okay,
I
yeah.
love his work. I love his work.
Yeah, so yeah, check that out if you get a chance. And then another thing writing wise that grabbed me was from the song "Wasting Young Man." You have the
Mm.
line, "Every heartbreak is a swinging door you can choose to walk through," and it stood out to me because I've never heard that metaphor of a swinging door used with heartbreak before.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
Normally it's some sort of crushing blow, or something painful, and it almost makes it seems like light and casual, but I know that's not necessarily what you meant. So I'm curious, in what way is a swinging door apropos to a heartbreak?
Yeah. So I actually had a specific person in mind when I wrote this song. And I remember the the darkness uh, that enveloped my friend upon the realization that this person he loved did not love him back, right? Um, but I've known this person long enough to know it all worked out okay, right?
Mhm.
Eventually he did find love. To do that, he had to put himself out there, right? And so that was it just seemed to me that the swinging door was a great metaphor for choice, because I mean you can stay in the darkness. I mean you can stay where you are,
Mm,
or you can take a risk, a chance to, you don't know what's on the other side of the door, but if you go through it, but it's welcoming you. So it's not a closed door. It's
yeah.
not an open. It seemed to me that the swinging door gives the person on the one side of it um, ultimate agency in
Hmm.
what happens next, because it's not closed, it's not open in an inviting way per se. You must choose, and that's what the song says. You can choose. And so it was the choice that I wanted to really amplify with that metaphor.
Okay. Okay. No, I get that. I get that. And then speaking of choices, so you have of all the musicians I've interviewed, you have a very different background than than any of them. You know,
It's
and I'm wondering, because you achieved a lot as an attorney, in government, in the public sector, in private sector, um, and then came around to music, and I'm wondering what advantage was there to starting down this creative musical path later.
yeah, I think maybe one of the biggest advantages I I have in the journey I've traveled is, I've been at the bottom of something several times now.
Hmm.
As a military officer, I was at the bottom of the heap. I was as junior as you could be, and and had to kind of climb my way up. When I was a prosecutor, I was the only one in the office who started with no trial experience. Someone
Mm.
advocated for me to be hired, and but for that advocate, they never would have hired me. And so I had to prove myself, and so the list goes on. And so I know how to be at the bottom of something and where there's a lot of doubt
Mhm.
whether I can pull it off. And I have to use whatever, tools I have in my toolkit, ingenuity, perseverance, grit, comfort with failure, all those things. I've done that rodeo many times. And so,
Mm.
you know, being at the bottom of music and having to, prove myself, and ourself as a band with results, and there being doubt, sort of, and there are like two main flavors of the doubt that someone like me has to navigate. One is, music, the bias is that it's, a young person's thing. And so, you know, fighting that bias to sort of make a case that, emerging artists or, new artist or whatever label you want to use for it, is not, um, generationally bound, right? Is sort of, what Paula Boggs Band is in part. And secondly, that this isn't a hobby, that this is a real thing, right?
Mhm.
And there are people. I'm from Seattle, and there are people in Seattle for whom, and they're decent enough, or they were decent enough. In the case of Paul Allen, the late billionaire,
Mhm.
was a musician, and he built this amazing studio in his home, and musicians from all over the world would come and play with Paul, right? But it was
Yeah.
a hobby, right? And everybody knew it was a hobby.
Right.
And so it was like, that's not me. We're out there, we were in Quality Inn in Spokane 2 nights ago,
Mhm.
and there was no elevator in this motel, right? You had to
Yeah.
schlep, your stuff up, and that's who we are, and we've traveled that way, every night we play. um Sometimes there's only a couple people in the room, and sometimes there's a lot of people in a room, and we give the same show. And I think that that ethic of, no, we I take nothing for granted, we take nothing for granted.
Mhm.
We love our fans. We are indebted to our fans, and every person who takes the time to listen to what we do, because there's a lot of competition for ears and eyes, time. And so when people show up, they honor us, and it's our job to create communion. And I think our band is particularly good at doing that, of creating this space in a live setting where people, I've heard it, I can't tell you, Chris, how many times people say, I feel better leaving
Mhm.
this venue than I did when I came in. And even some reviewers for this album have said, this is the 2026 album I didn't know I needed.
Mhm.
This is the cup of coffee I didn't know I needed, sort of
Mhm.
thing. And when I hear that and read that, I go, yes, because that was, as a songwriter, that was the hope.
Mhm. And I'm also wondering, I mean, because again, as you've alluded to before, a lot of these songs on this album, um, they're common themes of struggle and overcoming massive obstacles, and sometimes getting knocked down by those massive obstacles. And even some of the songs we discussed, it's like this. There's a perspective. There's a long view to them, and
Mhm.
I'm wondering
Mhm.
though, like maybe that's another advantage. Like you couldn't have written from that
Mhm.
perspective as a younger person.
Absolutely. I feel that, and I actually said that to the producer, Tucker Martine. I said that at the outset. I said, Tucker, because this is the, I think, third project we've worked with Tucker on. And I said, look, my goal is to make many more, Paula Boggs Band albums. But if this were the last one, because none of us knows how much time we have. I mean, one of the songs says that,
Yeah.
Bar to Vietnam. We don't know, right? I want people to reflect on this album as the statement of what Paula Boggs Band was, and who I was as a songwriter and an artist. And so we had that conversation. I said, I feel this urgency, and maybe part of it was my younger brother had just died. I felt
Mhm.
this urgency to to be authentic, but to also just put it all out there. I've always tried to be an honest songwriter, and I just, it was like, okay, I got to up my game. And I changed words, I changed lyrics when I thought they were maybe too vague or too whatever,
Mhm.
because I really wanted people to, that isn't, you know, yeah, it's a vibe album, at a time when a lot of people are, that's primarily why they listen to music, for the vibe. But I also wanted it to be a meaningful piece of art lyrically, for people to really have a window into what this band is and who I am
Mhm.
as an artist.
Okay, okay. And then, I know you have a hard stop coming up, so I just always like to offer, toward the end, um, is there anything we haven't covered that you wanna talk about?
The only thing, I would mention, and it's encapsulated in the 10th track, the final track, of the album. It was important for me to end the album with resolve, and that's why I chose "Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Round"
Mhm,
as the final statement of this album. It's joyful, but it's also a message of purpose and resolve. It includes the most well-known artists as collaborators on it: Valerie June and Blind Boys of Alabama. Blind Boys of Alabama for, a generation plus, right? I don't even know how long they've been in business, but for
mhm,
a long time, their brand has been associated with this kind of music, right? And the thing about Valerie June is Valerie June has one of those voices where she only has to sing like a couple notes and it's Valerie June, right?
mhm.
And so, the contrast of, me to Blind Boys to Valerie to this, sort of, chorus of sound that is rooted in resolve, joy and resolve. I was like, wow, you begin with Gregorian chant and that ancient prayer. You end with this joyous prayer
Mhm.
that has historically been associated with the civil rights movement. You can't get better than that. And so, I wanted your viewers to know that that's how it ends. That's how the album ends, and everything in between uh, those two songs is an attempt to amplify those themes.